There was a particular quality to mornings then. Not better or worse, just different. The sound of a screen door closing had its own rhythm, a creak, a slap, a gentle bounce against the frame. It wasn't something anyone thought about. It was simply the sound of someone leaving the house or coming home. Before the sun was fully up, there were milk bottles. They appeared on doorsteps while most people were still sleeping. Glass bottles, cooled to the touch, with cream settled at the top like a small reward for being awake early. The milkman knew the routes by heart. He knew which houses wanted 2 bottles on Fridays. He knew to be quiet near the Hendersons' place because their baby had just started sleeping through the night. You may remember the weight of those bottles, the way condensation formed on the outside in warm weather, how the metal caps could be pried off with a thumbnail if you were careful, or how they'd sometimes freeze and push up like little silver mushrooms in winter. Inside the house, mornings had a sequence. There wasn't a rush exactly, but things happened in order. Coffee percolated on the stove, not brewed, percolated, and the sound was as much a part of waking up as the light coming through the curtains. The radio might be on, voices calm and measured, telling you the weather, the time, what was happening in the world beyond your street. Breakfast was often the same each day: eggs and toast, oatmeal, perhaps some bacon on Sundays. People didn't think much about variety. Food was fuel, and routine was comfort. The table was set the same way. Everyone had their spot. Children walked to school, not because it built character or taught independence. They walked because that's what children did. In groups sometimes, alone sometimes. There were no arrangements to be made, no phones to check. You simply left at the right time and arrived when you arrived. Some will recall the weight of school books, real weight. Hard covers, cloth binding, pages that had been turned by hundreds of hands before yours. Your name written inside the front cover in pencil, and beneath it, names from years past, some carefully erased, some still visible like ghosts. Classrooms smelled like chalk dust and floor wax. The blackboard was actually black, and when the teacher wrote on it, there was that particular scratching sound. Clean erasers by clapping them together outside. That was sometimes given as a task, and it felt important even though it was simple. Watching the chalk dust drift away in clouds. Recess meant going outside. There was no alternative. Rain or shine, you went out. Girls played jump rope and hopscotch. Boys played marbles or threw a ball against the school wall. These weren't organized activities. No one taught you the rules. You learned by watching, by joining in, by being told, no, you do it like this, by someone only a year older than you. The school day ended, and children scattered like seeds. Some headed straight home. Others took the long way, stopping to look at things: a construction site, a store window, a dog behind a fence. There was time for that. Time moved differently when you weren't being watched by a clock. Home by supper time wasn't a rule that needed explaining. You just knew. When the streetlights came on, that was the signal. Or when you heard your mother calling from the porch. Her voice carried across yards and between houses, and somehow you always heard your own name, even if you were 3 streets over. For many, this was simply part of everyday life. Neighborhoods had a texture then. People knew each other, not because they tried to, but because proximity made it inevitable. Mrs. Patterson next door, the Kowalskis across the street, the elderly man at the corner house who always sat on his porch in the evenings, nodding at passers-by. Front porches were used. They weren't decorations. In warm weather, people sat out there, not doing anything in particular, shelling peas, reading the paper, watching the street. If someone walked by, you'd wave, maybe say a few words, maybe not. It didn't require effort. The mailman came at roughly the same time each day. You could set your watch by it, people said, though they rarely did. Getting the mail was an event, small but real. Walking out to the mailbox, the slight anticipation. Would there be something today? A letter from a cousin in another state, a catalog, the electric bill. Letters were written by hand. blue or black ink on paper that sometimes matched the envelope, sometimes didn't. People's handwriting was as recognizable as their voice. You knew a letter from your grandmother before you opened it. The slant of the letters, the way she made her loops. Writing back was understood. Not immediately, perhaps, but within a reasonable time. You sat at the kitchen table, or a desk if you had one, and you wrote. Told them what had been happening, asked questions, included small details that seemed worth sharing. The weather, something funny the neighbor's dog did, how the tomatoes were coming along in the garden. There was no expectation of immediate response. A letter took days to arrive, days more to be answered. This was simply how it worked. Telephones were different too. They were attached to the wall, or they sat on a table, heavy and solid. The receiver had weight to it. When it rang, everyone in the house heard it. Someone would answer, "Hello," and then call out to whoever the call was for. "It's for you, it's Aunt Jean." Phone calls were brief, mostly. They cost money if they went long distance. You said what you needed to say, and you hung up. Party lines meant you might pick up and hear your neighbor already talking. You'd quietly put the receiver down and try again later. Some will recall the sound of the dial, the mechanical whir as it spun back into place, getting a number wrong and having to start over, looking up numbers in the phone book, that thick volume that appeared on your doorstep once a year. Television was still new enough to feel special. Not every home had one at first. If you did, it was a piece of furniture, a wooden cabinet with a small screen, 3 channels, maybe 4, rabbit ear antennas that sometimes needed adjusting, someone standing there moving them slightly. "How's that? Better?" Programs came on at specific times. If you wanted to watch something, you planned for it. You were there when it started, or you missed it. There were no second chances. Families gathered in the living room. The show began, and everyone watched together, in real time, along with thousands of other families doing the same thing. When the national anthem played at the end of the broadcast day, that was it. The screen went to static. There was nothing more to watch. You turned it off and went to bed. Bedtime had a rhythm of its own. Doors were locked, front door, back door. Lights were switched off room by room. In summer, windows were opened. In winter, extra blankets were pulled from the closet. The house settled into its night sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of a clock, small creaks as wood expanded and contracted. Children shared rooms more often than not, bunk beds or twin beds with a nightstand between them. You'd talk in the dark sometimes, whisper so you wouldn't get in trouble, tell each other things that seemed important, make plans for tomorrow. Eventually, one of you would fall silent, asleep, and the other would follow soon after. Weekends had their own shape. Saturday was for chores, mowing the lawn, washing the car, cleaning the house. Children had tasks, taking out the trash, sweeping the porch, pulling weeds. These weren't punishments, they were simply what everyone did. When the work was done, there was time for other things. Downtown on a Saturday afternoon meant something. Main Street with its shops, the Five and Dime where you could buy almost anything, the drugstore with its soda fountain, the department store where everything smelled new and the floors were polished to a shine. Shopping took time. You looked at things. A clerk helped you. They knew where everything was, and if they didn't have what you needed, they'd tell you where you might find it. "Try Woolworth's," they'd say. "I think they carry that." You may remember the sound of a cash register, not electronic beeps, but mechanical bells and the snap of the drawer opening. Change counted out into your palm. Dollar bills, quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies, a receipt if you wanted one. The barber shop was a place men went regularly, not just for a haircut, though that was the purpose. It was a place to sit and wait your turn, reading magazines or talking with whoever else was there. The barber knew how you liked your hair. He'd been cutting it the same way for years. The chairs were tall and comfortable. The floor was scattered with hair that would be swept up between customers. There was a particular smell,
talcum powder, aftershave, hair tonic. Women went to the beauty parlor. Hair was set in rollers, nails were filed and painted. There was time under the dryer, reading a magazine, possibly talking with the woman in the next chair. These places had a routine, a process. You didn't rush beauty. Sunday was different from other days. Church for many families, dressing in your good clothes, sitting together in a pew that was always roughly the same pew. The service followed a pattern, hymns everyone knew by heart, a sermon, the collection plate passed down each row. Afterward, people stood outside talking, making plans perhaps, seeing who was there and who wasn't, noticing that the Mitchell's son was home from the service, that the Garcias had a new baby. Small threads of community woven together through these brief exchanges.
Sunday dinner was often the biggest meal of the week. Pot roast, baked chicken, ham, potatoes and vegetables, pie for dessert. The table set properly, everyone sitting down together. Conversation moved at its own pace. Pass the potatoes. How was school this week? Did you hear about so-and-so? The meal itself was secondary to the time spent together. Some will recall Sunday drives. No destination in particular, just driving to see the countryside. Windows down if the weather was nice, passing farms and fields, small towns that looked like your own town. Stopping for ice cream, maybe. Arriving back home in the early evening in time to get ready for the week ahead. The corner store was a place children could go alone. You'd bring a few coins and buy penny candy. The old woman behind the counter knew you by name. She'd watch as you deliberated, trying to decide jawbreakers or licorice, bubblegum or root beer barrels. Sometimes she'd slip an extra piece into the bag. "Don't tell," she'd say with a wink, though it wasn't really a secret. Parks were where families gathered on summer evenings. Picnic tables claimed early, blankets spread on the grass. Children ran in loose groups, playing games that required no equipment. Tag, hide and seek, Red Rover. Parents watched from a distance, talking among themselves, only intervening when absolutely necessary. There was a sense of safety that didn't need to be discussed. Children were visible but not supervised every moment. They climbed trees, rode bikes, explored. Minor injuries were expected. Scraped knees, bruised elbows. You brushed yourself off and kept playing. The ice cream truck was an event. You heard it before you saw it. That tinny music growing louder, children appearing from yards and houses, coins clutched in hand. The truck would stop, and there'd be a small crowd. Choosing took time. Popsicles, creamsicles, ice cream sandwiches. The vendor patient, used to the indecision. Drugstores had soda fountains, spinning stools at a long counter. You could order a Coke, and they'd make it there, syrup and carbonated water mixed in a glass. A cherry Coke meant they added cherry syrup. It tasted different than anything that came from a bottle. Ice cream sodas, milkshakes made in metal cups, so thick you had to wait a moment before you could drink through the straw. The person behind the counter often wore a white paper hat. They knew the regulars, knew who wanted extra whipped cream, who couldn't have nuts. There was a small pleasure in being known. Drive-in movies were a summer tradition for many families. Loading into the car just as it was getting dark, arriving early to get a good spot. The speaker that hung on your car window, tinny and quiet, you had to be still to hear properly. Sometimes there was a playground near the screen. Children would run around before the movie started, burning off energy. When the sky finally darkened enough, the feature would begin. Families watched from their cars, sharing popcorn, falling asleep in the back seat if you were young enough. The second feature was often for the adults, children already sleeping, curled up with a blanket. The drive home quiet, parents talking softly in the front seat, being carried inside, half awake, and put to bed without quite remembering how you got there. For many, this was simply part of everyday life. Grocery shopping happened weekly. One trip, one store. You pushed a metal cart up and down aisles, everything in its place. Canned goods here, produce there, meat at the back. The butcher would cut what you asked for, wrap it in white paper, write the price on top with a grease pencil. The checkout girl knew how to work the register without looking. Her hands moved quickly, pulling items toward her, ringing them up. She'd tell you the total, and you'd pay. Cash, mostly. Checks, sometimes, with identification. She'd bag your groceries, or someone else would. Paper bags packed carefully so nothing would crush. You carried the bags to your car yourself, loaded them in the trunk, drove home and unloaded them, put everything away. The refrigerator filled for the week, the pantry stocked, a particular satisfaction in seeing everything in its place. Kitchens were the heart of the home, not large usually, efficient. Everything within reach, the stove, the sink, the counter space. Cooking happened there every day, breakfast, lunch, dinner. From scratch mostly, because that was simply how it was done. Recipes were on cards, stained and worn from use, or they were in your head, learned from your mother who learned from hers. Measurements were approximate. A pinch of this, enough flour until it feels right. You knew by touch, by sight, by experience. Baking meant the house smelled like home. Bread rising, cookies in the oven, a cake for someone's birthday. There was time for this, time to let dough rest, time to wait for things to cool. The kitchen table was where life happened. Meals, yes, but also homework, paying bills, mending clothes, conversations. The radio might be on, someone might be reading the paper, but there was a sense of being together even when doing separate things. You may remember the sound of percolating coffee, the way a pressure cooker hissed, the particular squeak of an oven door, the hum of a refrigerator that was just a refrigerator, no ice maker, no water dispenser, just a box that kept things cold. Clothes were washed less frequently, not because people were dirty, but because washing was work. A washing machine, if you had one, was a significant appliance. Loading it, running it through its cycles, feeding clothes through a wringer if it had one, hanging everything on the line to dry. Clotheslines stretched across backyards. Wooden pins held shirts and sheets and towels. They dried in the sun and the breeze, smelling like outside. Stiff sometimes until you shook them out. In winter, they'd freeze solid and have to be brought in to finish drying indoors. Ironing was regular work. Shirts, dresses, even sheets sometimes. The iron was heavy and got hot. You set up the ironing board in the kitchen or living room, sprinkled water on the clothes if they were too dry. The smell of hot cotton, the satisfaction of a crisp crease. Mending was expected. A button came loose, you sewed it back on. A seam split, you stitched it. Socks were darned, hems were let down as children grew. Clothes lasted because you made them last. Some will recall the rag bag. Clothes too worn to be worn anymore were saved, cut into pieces, used for cleaning, made into quilts. Nothing was wasted without consideration. Evenings in fall and winter meant everyone was inside. Homework at the kitchen table, father reading the paper in his chair, mother mending or knitting, the radio playing softly. Later, the television might be on, programs the whole family would watch together. There was a comfort in the routine, in knowing what came next, dinner at the same time, certain shows on certain nights, bedtime that didn't vary much, the house growing quiet as people settled into sleep. Libraries were places of silence and respect. You whispered if you spoke at all. The librarian sat at a large desk, stamping cards, keeping track of who had what. Books were arranged with care. The Dewey Decimal System meant everything had its place. Choosing a book took time. You'd browse the shelves, pull one out, read the first few pages to see if it caught you, check the due date card to see how many people had read it before you, carry your selections to the desk where they'd be stamped and recorded. You had 2 weeks. When you were done, you returned them. Sometimes you renewed them if you weren't finished. There were no reminders. You simply knew when things were due. Reading happened without distraction. You sat in a chair or lay on your bed, the book in your hands, pages turned one at a time.
Hours could pass. Outside, the world continued, but you were elsewhere, inside the story. Rainy days had their own quality. The sound of rain on the roof, against the windows, playing inside, board games pulled from the closet, cards shuffled and dealt, jigsaw puzzles spread across a table, worked on gradually over days. The newspaper arrived every day, folded and tied, thrown onto the porch or driveway. Someone would retrieve it, untie it. The paper was divided among family members. Father got the front section and sports, mother got the local news, children looked at the comics. Comics were in color on Sundays. That was special. Blondie, Dick Tracy, Little Orphan Annie. You read them in order, following stories that continued day to day. Classified ads filled pages. Jobs, items for sale, apartments for rent. People read through them carefully, circled possibilities, made plans. Garage sales weren't common yet, but yard sales existed. Signs handwritten and posted on telephone poles, arrows pointing the way, tables set up in driveways with items no longer needed. You'd stop if you saw something interesting, browse through old dishes, tools, books, clothes, offer a price, carry your finds home. Hardware stores smelled like lumber and oil and metal. Men went there for specific items, a certain size nail, a particular type of hinge. The person working there knew where everything was, could answer questions, might offer advice on how to fix whatever you were trying to fix. There was pride in doing things yourself, fixing a leaky faucet, painting a room, building a shelf. You didn't call someone unless it was beyond your skill, and if you didn't know how, you asked a neighbor who did.
Neighbors helped each other without keeping score, borrowed a cup of sugar, loaned a tool, watched someone's house while they were away, brought over a casserole when someone was sick. These gestures required no acknowledgement. They were simply what people did. Snow days meant waking up to silence, a particular kind of silence that meant snow had fallen. You'd look out the window and see everything white. School might be canceled. The radio would announce it. Excitement among children, resignation among adults. Sleds came out of garages, saucers, toboggans, hills that everyone knew were good for sledding. You'd go out in layers. Undershirt, shirt, sweater, coat, scarf, hat, mittens, boots with buckles. You'd stay out until you were cold through, then come inside to hot chocolate. Mittens drying on the radiator, wet socks draped over chair backs, the smell of wool and wetness, cheeks red from cold, fingers tingling as they warmed. For many, this was simply part of everyday life. Doctors made house calls. Not always, but sometimes. If a child had a high fever or an elderly person couldn't get out of bed, the doctor would come. He'd arrive with his black bag, take a temperature, listen to breathing, write a prescription, tell you what to do. The visit was brief but thorough. Medicine came from the pharmacy. The pharmacist knew you, knew what you took regularly, would explain how to take something new, would warn you about side effects. The bottles were brown glass with typed labels. Dentist visits were endured, the drill louder and slower than it would become. No numbing sometimes, or minimal. You gripped the armrests and waited for it to be over. The reward afterward might be a piece of sugar-free gum from a small basket by the door. Vaccinations happened at school sometimes. A nurse would come. Everyone would line up. The shot was quick, but the anticipation was worse. A small bandage afterward, worn like a badge. Summers seemed longer, not because they actually were, but because time felt different. No school meant days that stretched out, mornings spent however you wanted, afternoons at the pool or the lake or in your backyard. Swimming pools were public and crowded. You paid a small fee to get in, changed in locker rooms that smelled like chlorine and mildew. The water was cold at first, crowded with children. A lifeguard on a tall chair, whistle ready.
Rules posted on signs. No running, no diving in the shallow end.
You'd stay until your fingers pruned, until your lips turned blue, until your mother said it was time to go. The drive home wrapped in a towel, hair wet, smelling like chlorine. Barbecues meant the grill coming out. Charcoal that had to be lit and tended, the smell of lighter fluid, then smoke, then cooking meat. Hot dogs and hamburgers, corn on the cob, watermelon afterward, sweet and messy. Fireflies came out as it got dark. Children caught them in jars, punched holes in the lids, watched them glow, let them go before bed. The sound of crickets, the distant bark of a dog, darkness that was complete unless there was a moon. Camps happened in summer. Day camps, sleepaway camps. You went with a trunk or a duffel bag full of clothes labeled with your name, homesickness for some, adventure for others. Activities planned and structured, crafts, swimming, hiking, sitting around a campfire singing songs everyone knew. Letters home written on thin paper, telling your parents you were fine, asking them to send more stamps, receiving letters back with news from home, counting down the days until pickup. County fairs came once a year, the fairgrounds filling with tents and rides and animals, the smell of fried food and livestock. Competitions for the best pie, the biggest pumpkin, the finest quilt. Ribbons awarded, pride in small victories. Rides that spun and lifted, tickets bought in strips, children begging for one more ride, winning a goldfish in a plastic bag, carrying it home carefully, hoping it would survive. High school football games on Friday nights, the whole town turning out. Bleachers full, the band playing, cheerleaders cheering, the smell of popcorn and hot dogs from the concession stand. Under the lights, the game unfolded. Familiar players, sons of people you knew. The score mattered, but so did being there, being part of the crowd, the shared experience. Afterward, everyone went somewhere, a diner or a drive-in, parked cars at the overlook, talking about the game, making plans for tomorrow, the weekend stretching ahead. Drive-in restaurants where waitresses came to your car on roller skates. You ordered through a speaker, food arrived on a tray that hooked onto your window, burgers and fries and milkshakes, eating in the car, watching people come and go. Jukeboxes in diners, a nickel or a dime for a song, flipping through the selections, making your choice, waiting for it to play. The music filling the space. Booths with vinyl seats, counters with spinning stools, coffee refilled without asking, pie under glass domes, the waitress who called everyone hun and remembered how you liked your eggs. Some will recall the sound of a cash register, the bell that rang when the drawer opened, paying in exact change, leaving a tip on the table. Gas stations where an attendant pumped your gas, washed your windshield, checked your oil. You didn't get out of the car. You just told them what you needed. They did the rest. Maps kept in the glove compartment, unfolded across the steering wheel when you needed to figure out where you were going, refolded imperfectly, creases wearing thin. Road trips with the family, luggage strapped to the roof, cooler in the trunk, sandwiches made at home, stopping at rest areas, using bathrooms that were clean enough, stretching your legs. Neon signs with motels, separate cabins sometimes, the smell of stale cigarette smoke even if no one in your family smoked, a TV bolted to the dresser, a thin bedspread over thin sheets, the ice machine down the breezeway, postcards bought at gift shops, written and mailed to grandparents or friends. Wish you were here. A picture of wherever you were. The message brief because space was limited. Returning home after a trip felt good. Your own bed, your own bathroom. Unpacking slowly or not at all. Laundry piling up, stories to tell, but mostly you were just glad to be back. You may remember the particular feeling of home, not the house itself, but the sense of it, the smell, the sounds, the way light came through certain windows at certain times of day. The view from your bedroom window, the tree outside, the neighbor's fence, the street quiet in early morning, busy in afternoon,
quiet again at night. The feeling of Saturday morning. Cartoons on television if you woke early enough. The house still sleepy. Making your own breakfast if you were old enough. Cereal in a bowl, toast with butter. Playing in the yard, dirt roads in some towns, paved in others. Riding bikes in circles, drawing with chalk on the sidewalk. Making up games that had no rules anyone could explain. The sound of a lawnmower in the distance, someone washing their car, a dog barking, children calling to each other. Church bells ringing on Sunday, the train whistle at the same time every evening, the factory shift change. Sounds that marked time without you thinking about it. Seasons changed and you noticed, not because someone told you, but because you felt it. The air shifting, the light different, trees budding or leaves falling. Spring meant windows opened, fresh air through the house. Cleaning that was called spring cleaning for a reason. Beating rugs, washing curtains, wiping down walls. Summer meant fans in windows, screens to keep bugs out, sleeping with just a sheet. The house warm all day, cooling slowly at night. Fall meant leaves to rake, piles to jump in, the smell of them burning in places where that was allowed, smoke drifting through the neighborhood. Winter meant storms watched through windows, snow days, shoveling the walk, salt on the steps, the quiet that came with heavy snow. Holidays had traditions that didn't need discussing. Thanksgiving meant family gathering, too much food, dishes that took hours to prepare, the table extended with extra leaves, chairs borrowed from other rooms. Christmas meant decorations brought down from the attic, the tree going up, lights carefully untangled, ornaments hung one by one, some old, some new, tinsel added last, piece by piece. Stockings hung on the mantel, cookies left out for Santa, children too excited to sleep, morning coming early, presents opened while still in pajamas, wrapping paper everywhere. The day slow and peaceful after the morning rush, relatives arriving, more food, leftovers for days. New Year's Eve meant staying up late, watching the clock, counting down, a kiss at midnight, hope for the year ahead. Easter meant new clothes, church in the morning, egg hunts in the afternoon, baskets with plastic grass, chocolate that melted if left in the sun. 4th of July meant parades, flags, fireworks after dark, sparklers for children, the sky lighting up, the boom echoing, sitting on blankets in the park, looking up. Birthdays were simpler, a cake, candles, singing, presents that were wanted, needed, or both, a party with neighborhood children, games in the backyard, prizes that cost pennies. The passage of time marked by these repeating days, each year like the last in its structure, different in its details. Some will recall how little changed year to year, the same neighbors, the same routines, the same stores downtown, a comfort in that, a knowing what to expect. Change happened slowly enough that you didn't always notice, a new family moving in, a store closing, a road being paved, someone passing away, but the overall shape of life remained. There was less to keep track of, fewer decisions, fewer choices, not because options didn't exist, but because you settled into what worked.